Sometimes the purest beauty is born precisely where we least expect to find it. Martha Henderson walked down the main street of Cedar Ridge with measured steps, carrying a basket of fresh bread she had just baked. Her grey hair was tied up in a simple bun, and her hands, calloused by hard work, told the story of a life dedicated to caring for others. She had lost her husband 2 winters ago to a fever that swept through the city like the dry wind blowing from the gorges. The afternoon sun mercilessly punished the wooden buildings that lined up like weary soldiers along the dusty road. Cedar Ridge was not a prosperous town, but it had enough to support its hard-working families. The liquor hall, Mr. Cooper's hardware store, the small light wood church, and a few scattered houses formed the heart of this slow-growing community, like everything else in the West. Martha kept a small boarding house at the back of her house, where she offered hot meals to travelers and workers passing through the region. She was known for her generosity and the affectionate way she treated everyone who knocked on her door, regardless of their origin or condition. Many said that she had a heart bigger than the Arizona Territory itself. On that Thursday afternoon, as she headed to the Morrison home to deliver the loaves she had ordered, Martha had no idea that her life was about to take a completely different turn. The wind blew stronger than usual, raising small swirls of dust that danced through the street like restless ghosts. The townspeople greeted her with cordial waves. Martha had earned everyone's respect through years of honest work and dedication to the community. When the fever had struck Cedar Ridge, she was one of the first to volunteer to care for the sick, even though she knew the risks she was taking. Her home had been transformed into a makeshift hospital, where she prepared nutritious soups and applied cold compresses to the foreheads of feverents. The church bell rang 3 times, marking the time of the afternoon. Martha adjusted the basket on her arm and continued her walk, watching the clouds that formed on the horizon. There were signs that a storm was approaching, and she knew she needed to complete her deliveries before the rain came. The dirt roads turned into mud when wet, making any displacement an arduous task. As he passed through the post office, he found Mr. Willis arranging the day's mail. He greeted her with a warm smile and commented on the delicious aroma coming from her basket. Martha returned the kindness and moved on, feeling grateful to be part of a community where there were still genuinely good people. The Morrison house was at the end of the street, a 2-story building with a wide porch where Mrs. Morrison used to embroider on milder afternoons. Martha could see smoke coming out of the chimney, indicating that the family was preparing dinner. She quickened her pace, eager to deliver the still warm bread. As she walked, Martha thought of her own family. Her daughter Emily had left for the East 2 years ago, in search of better job opportunities as a teacher. The letters arrived irregularly, but they always brought comforting news about his new life in the big city. Martha was proud of her daughter's courage, even though the distance weighed on her heart like a stone. The wind continued to blow, bringing with it the smell of rain and the promise of change. Martha didn't know it yet, but that ordinary afternoon was about to turn into the beginning of a journey that would test her strength, her faith, and her ability to find beauty even in the most difficult moments of her life. Martha knocked lightly on the Morrison door and was greeted by Mrs. Morrison, who invited her in for coffee. As they talked about preparations for the town's fall festival, a noise of approaching horses' hooves caught the attention of the 2 women. Through the window, they could see a dusty carriage pulling up in front of Martha's boarding house. The coachman, a middle-aged man in clothes worn from the trip, got out of the seat and began to unload some luggage. Then he reached out to help someone get out of the vehicle. Martha watched curiously, trying to identify who might be the new guest who arrived at her boarding house unannounced. When the figure finally emerged from the carriage, Martha felt her heart leap. She was a young woman, but there was something different about her appearance that made her stand out in an unusual way. Her hair was a light golden hue, almost white, and her skin had a paleness that contrasted sharply with the typical tan of the people of the region. She moved delicately, as if each step was carefully calculated. Mrs. Morrison let out a small sigh next to Martha. "What a peculiar creature," he murmured under his breath without malice, just with the natural curiosity of someone who lived in a small town where new faces were a rarity. Martha, however, remained silent, watching the young woman with a mixture of fascination and compassion that she could not fully explain. The young woman carried a small brown leather suitcase and looked around with large, expressive eyes, which seemed to absorb every detail of the barren landscape of Cedar Ridge. His clothes were simple but well-groomed, suggesting that he came from a family of modest means. There was a fragility in her posture that awakened a protective instinct in those who observed her. The coachman pointed in the direction of Martha's boarding house and said a few words to the young woman, who nodded in thanks. He climbed back into the carriage and drove off, leaving the girl alone in the dusty street with her luggage. She stood still for a few moments, as if she was gathering the courage to take the next steps. Martha quickly said goodbye to Mrs. Morrison and walked out the back door, skirting her own house to reach the main entrance before the young woman had to wait too long. As you get closer, you can see more clearly the unique characteristics of the newcomer. His hair was almost completely white, despite his apparent age of no more than 20 years, and his eyes were a very light blue color, almost transparent. The young woman's condition was known to the inhabitants of the larger cities, but rarely seen in remote places like Cedar Ridge. Martha had read about it in one of the medical books that her late husband kept, but she had never met anyone born with this particularity. The absence of pigmentation in the skin and hair created an ethereal appearance, as if the person did not belong entirely to this world. "Good afternoon," Martha said in her usual warm voice. "You must be looking for lodging in the boarding house. I'm Martha Henderson, the owner." The young woman looked up and smiled shyly, revealing a sweet and gentle expression that immediately touched Martha's heart. "My name is Sarah Collins," the young woman replied in a soft voice. "I received a letter saying that you could have a room available for me. I come to work as a teacher at the Cedar Ridge School." His words carried a slight Eastern accent, indicating a formal upbringing that contrasted with the simplicity of the rural setting. Martha smiled warmly and gestured for Sarah to follow her. "Of course, honey. I have a perfect room for you, with a window that looks out onto the back garden." She must be tired of the trip. As they walked toward the house, Martha noticed how some people on the street stopped to watch the young teacher, whispering to each other with expressions of surprise and curiosity. The wind continued to blow, ruffling Sarah's almost white hair like silk threads. Martha felt that the arrival of this young woman would mark the beginning of something new in Cedar Ridge, though she could not imagine exactly what it would mean for her quiet, traditionally reserved community. Martha led Sarah through the house, showing her the room she had prepared with special care. It was a simple but cozy room, with an iron bed painted white, a small desk by the window, and a light wood chest of drawers. The flowery cotton curtains allowed the soft afternoon light to enter without dazzling, creating a perfect environment for someone with Sarah's sensibilities. During the first few days, the young teacher settled quietly in the boarding house. Martha watched as she moved around the house with extra care, always avoiding direct sunlight and preferring the milder hours of early morning and late afternoon for her walks. Sarah had a disciplined routine. She woke up early, ate her breakfast in silence, and then headed to school, carrying a leather briefcase with her teaching materials. The Cedar Ridge School was a modest wooden building with a single room where children of different ages learned together. The previous teacher had left earlier in the summer, leaving the community without formal education for his children for months. Sarah's arrival was eagerly awaited by parents who saw education as an opportunity for a better future for their children. However, the reactions to the new teacher were varied and not always welcoming. Some mothers were visibly uncomfortable when they saw Sarah for the first time, whispering comments about her unusual appearance. Others have shown genuine concern about whether a person with their condition would be able to properly teach their children. Sarah's physical difference aroused curiosity, fear, and in some cases, outright rejection. Martha watched these reactions with growing indignation. She'd spent enough time talking to Sarah to recognize her intelligence, kindness, and dedication to teaching. The young woman spoke 3 languages fluently, knew advanced math, and had brought with her an impressive collection of books that she planned to use to enrich the education of the children of Cedar Ridge. In the 3rd week after Sarah's arrival, the situation reached a critical point. During a meeting at the church to discuss community affairs, some residents raised questions about the suitability of the new teacher. Merchant Morrison was particularly blunt in his objections, arguing that children might be frightened or distracted by the teacher's appearance. The blacksmith's wife, Mrs. Cooper, expressed similar concerns, suggesting that it might be better to look for someone more appropriate for the position. His words, although not intentionally cruel, carried the weight of prejudice born of ignorance and fear of the different. Other residents remained silent, torn between the need for a teacher and their unspoken prejudices. Martha felt her blood boiling when she heard those comments. She knew Sarah well enough to know that the young woman was not only qualified, but extraordinarily talented as an educator. I had seen how she prepared her lessons with meticulous attention to detail, how she studied each child individually to adapt her teaching method, and how her passion for education shone in her clear eyes whenever she talked about her plans for school. Pastor Williams, a sensible middle-aged man, tried to mediate the discussion by reminding everyone about the Christian values of acceptance and compassion. He suggested that they give the young teacher a real chance before making snap judgments. Some residents agreed with his words, but division in the community was clearly established. That night, Martha found Sarah sitting on the back porch, looking up at the stars with a melancholy expression. The young woman had not mentioned the meeting, but Martha suspected that the news had already reached her ears. Cedar Ridge was too small to keep secrets for long, and Sarah was too smart not to notice the hostile reactions her presence provoked in some residents. The night wind brought the scent of sage and the distant sound of coyotes in the hills. Martha sat next to Sarah in silence, offering her presence as comfort. She knew that words were not always necessary between two souls who recognized each other as true friends. The crescent moon illuminated the garden with its silver light, creating a scene of serenity that contrasted with the emotional storm that was brewing in the small community. Sarah finally broke the silence with her soft voice, commenting on the beauty of the night sky in the west. Martha agreed, but her thoughts were focused on the injustice that was being done to this extraordinary young woman who had come to Cedar Ridge with only the desire to educate and serve. The storm brewing on Cedar Ridge finally blew up Monday morning as Sarah was heading to school as usual. A group of mothers had gathered at the entrance of the building, led by Mrs. Cooper and the wife of the merchant Morrison. His expressions were determined, and his folded arms indicated a resistance that had crystallized over the weekend. Sarah stopped a few feet away, holding her leather briefcase to her chest. She could feel the hostility in the air, like the smell of rain before the storm. The women spoke to each other in low tones, but their words clearly reached the ears of the young teacher. They questioned her ability, her appearance, and whether it was appropriate for her children to be exposed to someone so different. Martha, who had gone out to water her morning plants, noticed the situation developing and walked quickly towards the school. Her heart pounded in her chest, not of fear, but of deep indignation at the treatment that was being meted out to the young woman she had learned to admire and protect as if she were her own daughter. The ensuing confrontation was tense but civilized, maintaining the appearances of courtesy that small communities value even in the most difficult moments. Mothers voiced their concerns about Sarah's suitability to teach their children, using carefully chosen words to mask their prejudices as legitimate concerns about education. Martha replied with the firmness of someone who had lived long enough to recognize ignorance disguised as prudence. She spoke about Sarah's exceptional qualification, her dedication to her studies, and her genuine passion for teaching. He mentioned the advanced books the young woman had brought, the modern methods of education she intended to implement, and the unique opportunity Cedar Ridge had to provide a superior education to her children. Throughout the discussion, Sarah remained silent, her dignity intact, despite the humiliating situation. His clear eyes watched every face, reading the emotions behind the polite words. She had faced similar situations before, in other smaller towns where she had tried to teach. The rejection was not new, but that did not make the experience any less painful. The turning point came when little Tommy Morrison, the merchant's son, escaped his mother's surveillance and ran towards Sarah. The 7-year-old boy had developed a natural curiosity for the new teacher and did not carry the prejudices of adults. He stopped in front of Sarah and, with the innocence typical of childhood, asked the question that all adults avoided asking directly. Sarah's answer was simple and honest, explained in terms a child could understand. She talked about how some people are born with different characteristics, just as some flowers grow in different colors in the same garden. Tommy listened attentively and then smiled, declaring that he thought Sarah's hair was beautiful like an angel's. The boy's reaction created a moment of even greater tension among the adults present. His mother, visibly embarrassed, quickly pulled him away from Sarah, scolding him for his curiosity. But the damage was done, or perhaps the healing had begun. Tommy's innocence had exposed the artificiality of adult fears in ways that no rational discussion had been able to make. Other children, attracted by the commotion, began to gather around the group of adults. They watched Sarah with the same natural curiosity as Tommy, without the fear or rejection that her parents showed. Some even waved sheepishly to the teacher, who reciprocated with a gentle smile that lit up her pale face like a ray of sunlight piercing the clouds. Martha watched this interaction between Sarah and the children and felt her heart fill with a mixture of sadness and hope. She could see how the young teacher transformed in the presence of the little ones, how her shyness disappeared and was replaced by a natural confidence and genuine affection. It was evident that Sarah was born to teach, to nurture young minds and help them grow. The meeting ended without a definitive resolution, but the battle lines were clearly drawn. Some parents decided to keep their children at home until the situation was resolved, while others, influenced by their children's positive reaction, began to question their own prejudices. The community of Cedar Ridge was divided, and Martha knew that the next few days would be crucial in determining Sarah's future in the city. That afternoon, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, Martha met Sarah once again on the back porch. The young woman was correcting some exercises she had prepared for her potential students, a demonstration of her unwavering faith in the possibility that things could still change for the better at Cedar Ridge. Cedar Ridge's transformation began quietly, like most of the profound changes that mark the human heart. During the week following the confrontation at school, some children began showing up at the door of Martha's boarding house, curious to get to know the golden-haired teacher who had caused such a stir among the adults. Sarah, with her infinite patience and genuine love for teaching, received each child with the same affection. She showed them her picture books, taught them little lessons about geography using colored maps, and told stories that made the little ones' eyes light up with enchantment. Martha watched these interactions from her kitchen window, feeling her heart warm with each childish laughter that echoed through the garden. Tommy Morrison became the most frequent visitor, often escaping his mother's surveillance to spend afternoons at the boarding house. He had developed a special admiration for Sarah, asking about her classes and asking to see the teaching instruments she had brought back from the East. The young teacher always found time to answer her questions with the seriousness that children's curiosities deserve. It was during one of these visits that the moment that would forever change the community's perception of Sarah Collins took place. Tommy had arrived at the boarding house with tears in his eyes after an argument at home about his frequent presence in the company of the teacher. Sarah comforted him gently, offering him a glass of fresh lemonade and asking him what was bothering him. The boy, with the brutal honesty of children, told of the comments he heard at home about Sarah's appearance, about how his mother and other women in the city spoke of her as if it were something to be feared or avoided. Sarah listened in silence, her heart tightening with every innocent word that revealed the depth of the prejudices she faced. When Tommy finished his account, he looked directly at Sarah and made a statement that would echo for eternity in the hearts of all who heard her. With the clear, determined voice that only children possess when they express fundamental truths, he said he didn't understand why adults couldn't see what he saw so clearly. His next words were spoken with a conviction that surprised even Martha, who was listening from the kitchen. Tommy declared that Sarah was the most beautiful person he knew, not because of her looks, but because of her kindness, her patience, and the way her eyes sparkled when she taught her something new. He said that his golden hair seemed made of sunlight, and that his soft voice made even the most difficult lessons interesting to learn. The climactic moment came when Tommy's father, the merchant Morrison, showed up at the boarding house looking for his son. He had come prepared for another confrontation, but stopped abruptly when he heard the boy's words. Tommy, unaware of his father's presence, continued talking about Sarah with an enthusiasm that could not be feigned or forced. Morrison remained hidden behind the door, listening to his son describe how Sarah had taught him about the stars, about different countries in the world, and about the importance of kindness to all living things. The boy spoke with a maturity that surprised his father, demonstrating knowledge that he had acquired in just a few weeks of informal contact with the teacher. When Tommy finally noticed his father's presence, he ran up to him and, holding his hand, repeated his words with even more emphasis. Looking straight into Morrison's eyes, the boy declared with all the sincerity of his young heart that Sarah was beautiful, and that he hoped other adults could see the same beauty that he did. Morrison's reaction was slow but profound. He observed his son's radiant face, saw the genuine joy in his eyes, and realized how the boy had flourished intellectually in such a short time. For the first time, he looked at Sarah not through the filter of her prejudices, but through the pure eyes of her child. What Morrison saw was a young woman of extraordinary kindness, whose physical difference paled in comparison to the beauty of her character. He noticed how she interacted with Tommy, how her words were carefully chosen to educate and encourage, how her presence brought peace and wisdom to the environment around her. That afternoon, Morrison did something that surprised the entire Cedar Ridge community. He publicly apologized to Sarah, acknowledging that he had misjudged her character based solely on her appearance. He asked her to accept the teaching position officially, and promised that he would do everything in his power to ensure that she felt welcome in the community. News of Morrison's change of heart spread quickly through the city. Other parents, influenced by the positive transformation they saw in Tommy and other children who had interacted with Sarah, began to reconsider their own positions. Gradually, resistance to the young teacher began to crumble, replaced by a growing admiration for her dedication and competence. Sarah eventually took up her post at the Cedar Ridge School, where she remained for many years, becoming one of the most respected and beloved educators in the area. His classes were known for sparking curiosity and a love of learning, and many of his students grew up to become prominent people in their communities. Martha watched all this transformation with the silent pride of someone who had recognized true beauty from the first moment. She knew that Cedar Ridge had learned a valuable lesson: about looking beyond appearances, about finding the true beauty that resides in human character and goodness. And Tommy Morrison, the boy whose innocent words had changed the heart of an entire city, grew up knowing that he had witnessed and participated in something extraordinary. He carried with him throughout his life the memory of how the courage to see beauty where others saw only difference can transform not just a person, but an entire community. The sun continued to shine on Cedar Ridge, but now its light illuminated a city that had learned to value the true beauty that is born of kindness, wisdom, and unconditional love for humanity in all its wondrous diversity. If this story touched your heart, leave a like and share in the comments which moment moved you the most. Stories like this remind us that true beauty is always in gestures of kindness and acceptance. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our inspiring Wild West narratives.